Okay, so now let's start with this spotlight on the market. Hello, Vinay. How is it going?
Hi, Mariusz. It's going well. Great to be joining GameCamp again, and excited to be sharing about India as a market with everyone else.
Thank you, thank you. So so today we will be talking about India quite deeply because again it's getting more and more interesting market. We'll be doing that presentation together, and again reminding you that if you would like to ask questions, you can add to go to www.slido and then enter GameCamp as the name of the event. Okay, so we will be dividing the presentation into four parts. Why India? Why actually India is so important, and why it's getting even more important. Then what actually is happening in these gaming apps and gaming mobile mobile games and apps in India. Which genres are getting more important? Which genres are getting less important? What apps actually the India audience is actually looking at? And then we'll be talking about how India looks like from UA perspective, because actually what is quite interesting that some genres, India is very important in terms of user acquisition. So there is, if you even compare budgets spent on India versus US, they are quite significant, but in some genres, actually, that spend is not very high. I will be sharing a lot of insights from aggregated spend on Google. So like, I aggregated like the whole spend of Google advertising in India, trying to share actually insights which countries are getting more interesting, which countries are which genres are actually stronger in India, which are not, and then we'll have some tips around how to enter India and what is important in that specific market. Okay, if we start from why India.
Yeah, thanks, Mariusz. I can take it up from here. Great. So, hi everyone. A quick intro about myself before I deep dive into the slides. My name is Vinay. I'm part of the Google Play Games team in India, and I work with Indian as well as global gaming developers, helping them to expand their user base as well as monetization in India. And what I want to talk about today over here is a lot about what India and how India is shaping up in the global economy. What are the kind of trends that we are seeing in India in terms of mobile games, in terms of users as well as monetization. And to start from the big picture, India is actually among the world's fastest growing large economies, right? And this has been happening for a while. We've had large uh, FDI inflows coming in, close to around $80 billion came in 2020, 2021. The economy is expected to grow really fast, among the fastest growing in the world. By GDP, it's the fifth largest in the world. And because of all of this, we've had a lot of global organizations setting up shop in India, expanding their presence in India. And I'm happy to share that this has even happened over the past few months, where the global economic outlook has not been very positive, but the investments as well as inflows have continued in India. Mariusz, if you could please go to the next slide. Uh, so all of these inflows are actually being led by the consumer digital economy that's expected to grow 10x. It's expected to be around an 800 billion market by 2030. This is led by VC investments that have come into the e-commerce as well as internet companies in India. A lot of this, if you understand the geopolitical situation in APAC, have been funds that have been earmarked for other countries but have now flown into India. They've kind of plateaued over the last few months, but these are slightly older data points that I'm sharing across right now. And quite a few industries are doing well. There's e-commerce that's doing well. There's also mobile gaming, and we've seen a large number of unicorns that are coming up in India. And on the next slide, if you go, Mariusz, these are just again giving you an overview of the number of users that's there. I'm sure you would have seen some of these slides before, so I'm maybe just going to skim through some of them. But yeah, close to 900 plus million internet users in India. That's second only to China. If you go to the next one, we have the highest number of people that's yet to be connected as well to the internet. So that's an equally large opportunity, close to 700 million plus. And if you look at the next one, which is essentially, Mariusz, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this is essentially the number of households with internet access in India. and it's expected to grow significantly higher till 2025. Like 143 million plus will is what we 1.4 billion is what we expect in terms of number of households that will have internet in India. Now, if you go to the next slide, now that this is where data gets really interesting. So India is a mobile first market. There are close to 500 million plus smartphone users in India. That's massive. And if you combine that with affordable mobile internet, and that's been prevalent in India over the last couple of years, then what you have is a large population that's has access to mobile data on smartphones, and thus making it easier for them to consume media as well as games. And on the right hand side, essentially, it's how India as a market has evolved in terms of going mobile first. So a lot of these users are using internet for the or accessing internet for the first time on mobile and rather than on desktop. And it's kind of an outlier in that sense because we've bypassed the entire desktop cycle and moved straight to mobile. And this has led to interesting trends among the consumption of data and internet services as well. And I'll share more about that later. Uh, but here's I like to call this like a myth busting slide, because typically you would assume Indian audiences have significantly inferior devices or low RAM devices, or those devices have lower memory or lower screen sizes, etc. But that's absolutely not true. Uh, First and foremost, India is 95% Android, so that's how strong Android is in India. If you look at then the screen sizes, and that's the second chart in on the slide, about 77% of devices in 2021 itself were 6.5 inches and higher. Now, these are essentially large screen phones that you're seeing. And if I were to look at devices that were shipped in 2021, we see close to 60-65% of devices had 4 GB RAM or higher. So these are large screen devices with significantly fast like memory as well as RAM, essentially making it an excellent experience for media consumption as well as for gaming. And that's exactly why there's been a massive boom that we've seen in both these industries as well. If you go to the next one, um, yeah, so let me talk some numbers now, right? I've mentioned about the fact that the Indian gaming industry is growing, but this is how India gaming user spends on Android grew on a YOY basis as compared to the rest of the world. So, if I look at Q1 2021 onwards, which typically I would want to call those as the post-peak pandemic quarters, there was significantly high double-digit YOY growths for Indian gaming spend. So that's 95%, 78%, 81%. And if you compare it with the rest of the world, that is in single digits. So India is a massively growing market. Uh, but I know a lot of times these percentages and YOY growths may not share the complete picture, because you might say that the absolute numbers might be small and hence the YOY numbers are so large, but that's not true. And if you were to compare India along with the other emerging market opportunities out there, so along with say the top LATAM or the top SEA geos, and that's the second chart. So the bar charts over there represent the absolute value of consumer spends on Android, and as you can see, India is the largest bar chart in amongst all the towers over there, representing that it has the highest amount of consumer spends on Android games. So not only is it the fastest growing, which is represented by the dotted line, but it is also the largest opportunity amongst emerging markets. So it's a very unique market in that sense. You have large screen devices with good device specs growing at almost 80-90% YOY, and at the same time in absolute numbers being larger than some of the top LATAM as well as SEA geos. So if I were to call it, it's the biggest opportunity in mobile gaming globally right now. And although it's not over there, I'll also share across the red bar would be close to about 800 million USD in 2021. So that's how large the opportunity is, and growing 80%. So yeah, that's on the size of the opportunity in India. And here's something very interesting that happened in 2022. There were a bunch of external factors that have created an even better opportunity for global developers. Let me first explain in terms of what kind of buyers we existed. If you look at the left-hand side chart, so in Q4 of 2021, if you were to see how many users were buying in India, right? Typically, you would always assume India is a user market and not necessarily a buying market, but that's changed drastically. So if I take the average of the top three gaming markets globally for Android and compare it with India, it's literally half the number of buyers that the top three markets has. India has double the number of buyers. If I were to compare it with emerging markets, India has more than 3 or 4 times the number of buyers happening on a monthly basis. So interestingly, you look at buyer percentage, so you don't try to monetize them at higher price points. You monetize them at lower price points, but the sheer number of buyers out there will make your total revenue go up significantly, right? And what happened in February this year was the Indian government, again, geopolitical situation out there. So, considering some of them, the government banned a few apps and games, including the topmost app in game, and which actually led to a massive dip in Q1 of 2022 in terms of monthly gaming buyers. So, here's a very unique scenario. This has recovered to a great extent, but I'll just explain what happened in Q1 and Q2 of 2022. We had a large number of monthly gaming buyers. Suddenly the top games got taken away, and they were not spending. But there was a massive opportunity for other games, maybe in the same genre, maybe in other genres, to come in and get those users to start purchasing again, right? And that's the opportunity in buyers that exists in India, and that's where we're waiting for, or we would like some of the top global developers like yourself, to come in and ensure that these users who are used to spending month on month also spend on your games, right? And that's why I call this one of the largest opportunities in gaming globally. Next slide, Mariusz.
Great.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to you.
And in this case, if we actually look at the data, this is actually based on Apani, comparing the share of India, actually share of downloads coming from India and US, we see actually that 2020 was the highest increase in terms of the growth of downloads. Is actually if we talk about COVID, it was extremely strong there, and actually this COVID effect was extremely strong. But what was actually happening over the last years was actually that internet became more and more affordable in the India, which actually increased quite heavily the number of downloads in that market. Yeah. So in this case, again, if we compare, how those biggest markets like US are actually still being big, but declining in the share. If we compare it with India, it's really strong opportunity. It's not only in terms of gaming, but sometimes it's even and actually, if we even look at the data even closer, because the data is actually quite complex chart, that is actually comparing the downloads year over year in India versus year over year downloads in worldwide, we see that actually the blue chart is actually India, and then the line is actually worldwide in terms of all mobile games on Android devices. So we see that actually this 2020 was like extreme booming in India. So we see that even some months had even 80 to 100% year over year in terms of downloads, which extremely strong growth. Then 2021 was a little bit going back to the to some negative growth, but coming actually from this extremely high base in created 2020. So then again, if we look at the last months, actually the blue chart, which is actually the India, is actually much higher than average. Yeah. So in this case, we see that actually downloads in mobile games in India again are growing at much higher pace and growth rate than in other countries. That's actually happening not only in games, but it's happening in non-gaming apps as well. So actually, if we look at the share of downloads, from India from non-gaming apps is actually even higher than in games. In many cases, we associate associate India with gaming, but actually, very often the share and influence of non-gaming apps is even stronger than gaming. Yeah. So in this case, the share of non-gaming downloads from India is actually coming even up to 30%. In 2022 again, and actually it's growing even faster than in case of gaming. So which actually we can see at another quite complex chart, but again showing the growth on non-gaming apps in terms of downloads, comparing India versus the whole world. Yes, so again, we see a little bit not so strong growth in 2020, but still quite impressive, around 50% year over year. Then 2021 was actually nicer for non-gaming than for gaming, because gaming had a little bit negative growth. And then again, we see that again in the last months, which means 2022, again the growth of downloads in non-gaming is actually much higher over the market. And then if you look at the top games, Vinay, you could share what are like the top gaming genres?
Sure. So let me now just give you a brief intro into the top grossing games and what genres actually do really well in terms of monetization in India. These are again IAP spend genres. So action games dominate, and within action itself, battle royale games are really popular in India. But then match three, casual games, board games are also really popular. Couple of interesting things to note over here. The images or the screenshots of games that you see over here, there are only like three titles or four titles that are actually Indian developer titles. Most of the others over there are all global titles. So it's not like Indians are spending on games that are being created by Indian developers. That's not the case. As you can clearly see over here, the top crossing titles are all global titles, and battle royale, casual, and match three and board games are popular. Next slide. Yeah, and that kind of reflects even in this chart. So if you look at the top free downloads as well as the top grossing ones, and I'll focus maybe on the right hand side a little more, because we should all be aware of the left hand side numbers over there. But in terms of grossing titles, you have the action games, the strategy games, a few card games which are local version of like the Indian version of poker, which is what Teen Patti is, and you'll see a couple of those over there. But apart from that, these are all global titles that are there in terms of grossing. And in terms of downloads, you have, apart from Ludo King, again, majority of those games over there are all global titles that dominate the India user market. Yeah, if I look at now time spent, now this is where again it gets really interesting, right? We spoke about how popular action and battle royale games are. If you look at the pie chart for consumer spend, it just shows you how dominant that in terms of the percentage of total spends is on action and battle royale games, right? Maximum amount of spends happen over there, and significantly higher than 50% of the total spends in India. And then the other genres kick in. If you look at the time spent here, there's an equal split between action games as well as some other genres, say like board games, etc. And that's where but still action games are extremely popular even in terms of time. And if you go to the last one, in terms of let's say a delta of YOY delta among different genres, so you see action going negative only because of this is Q1 2022 data, and that's where a couple of top action games were banned by the Indian government because of their linkages to a particular geo. That's why the time spent is negative YOY. However, despite that ban, the spend is actually positive. So you can imagine, had there been no ban, how much positive the spends would have been in terms of action. But then other genres are also picking up. You have casual, sports, card games. All of those are growing double digit in terms of spends. Uh, Again, I'll keep reiterating that Indian users are not just spending time; they're spending a lot of money in games, and it's up to you now to tap into the market and ensure that users are spending on your games and significantly earning revenue from there. Uh, Moving on.
Yeah, so in this case, if we look at which is I think quite interesting topic as well, if you look at the monetization of mobile games, we try to kind of estimate what is the share of the ads and e-app revenue in that in those in actually in India in different genres. So again, we have some genres that are extremely like IIP driven, like strategy. And of course, like shooter, like role playing. Again, those games that even in India and in all emerging markets, very often they are like very IIP dominant. But of course, we have some genres like board, card, where we have some sometimes some like Ludo King or like similar games, Rami. So those actually have a pretty strong share of the ads revenue, and that's actually it's quite important to remember about that as well. And then if we go further, is actually if we look at the what is actually the share of category in non-gaming downloads, we can actually look at what is the average versus the what is the category like worldwide. So in this case, we see the blue line that is showing share of that category in total downloads in non-gaming in worldwide. Sorry, India versus the red one is actually worldwide. Yeah, so we see actually in non-gaming we have strong kind of over representation of, for example, like social, finance and fintech apps in India. Those are extremely strong. We have very strong like communication, education, for example, is quite strong there as well. And then we can, of course, look at the India from UA perspective as well. So in this case, I couldn't, of course, share the kind of absolute numbers, but I was trying to compare India with US. I mean, everyone knows US, so it's actually easy that by perspective. Like, for example, how many users you can buy in that specific genre for one user in US. And for example, we see that some games that have extremely strong monetization, let's see match 3, of course, they have so high KPIs in US that I would say requirements for the users are extremely strong. So you need to have a lot of users in India actually to make it on the way towards US. But still, we have, for example, like there are some games where actually shooter or racing games where in general the users quality is much higher versus, for example, like categories like match 3 or like RPG. Yeah, because at the end of the day, the price in the specific market shows the quality of the user as well. Yeah, so if in the specific market like advertisers pay a lot, it means that they earn a lot on that user. Yeah, because in other way they wouldn't spend so much. So that's why I would say in this case, if I'm from those categories, it means that actually the user's quality is pretty strong. So I can actually really think, okay, do I really spending something in India? If I'm in those categories, it means actually it's actually a really good place to buy a lot of users for very, very cheap price versus US users. Okay. And then, of course, we need to ask ourselves like the next question. Okay, we know that this India market is so important, so good, but how actually to enter India? What is really important to be there?
Yeah, I can take this, and this is just learning from some of those successful action games in India. What have they done right? I'm going to share across a few insights from there. Number one, the fact that these were real-time multiplayer games, so you could play with your community, with your friends. You could play in local groups, intercity groups, etc. And that's something that was really popular, and which is why multiplayer games have become extremely popular in India. The second part, and because of the large population and in India, and we're extremely competitive, that also leads to a lot of pride in being high on leaderboards, in being number one, and which is why gaming developers have really leveraged esports, leaderboards, social recognitions very well within games to make those features popular, make those games popular, and then hence get more users. uh, Interestingly, the Indians also want to showcase or look and act like a winner. So if you create pay to win games, you will not really get a lot of traction because not all of them will continuously keep spending. But will Indians are actually okay to spend for skins, and that's what we've seen pick up really well. You can also price this at significantly lower value as compared to some of your consumable items within the games, and hence the traction for this is really high. So this is something that makes it really successful. If I were to add one more point, this is essentially about localization, and a lot of time gaming developers keep asking me that India has so many languages. How do I localize? Which languages do I localize for? And there's a lot of content that's going to come in this deck itself. But one of the ways in which gaming developers overcame this challenge was essentially they said let's use more video, then audio, and then text. So even if I've created, let's say, audio chat features, I've created video tutorials, etc. That eliminates the need for me to have text in the game itself, and thus eliminates the need for me to localize into multiple languages. And that's something that gaming developers have done really well, especially action game developers. Moving on.
Yeah, so it's quite important to remember that it used to be a few years ago that India was mostly about English, and actually most of the content created for that country was in English. But then, of course, the developers really started to recognize Hindi, and there were more and more actually content in Hindi. But then we actually we need to realize that actually there are quite a few languages in India that have more than 50 million users, and they are popular and two things are quite important. The first one is that sometimes it happens that one language is not so big in terms of, for example, population, but it's extremely strong in internet, extremely strong in the media in terms of content consumption. I think Telugu is actually quite a lot of, even I think at Netflix, you have quite a lot of movies, for example, for created in Telugu, which is again quite important for, I would say, higher end users in terms of the content. And then there is a lot of actually there is a lot of push around this localization, and I think Vinay was used to work in the AdMob team, and actually I remember from his presentation a lot of actually examples how actually even Indian developers started to localize the content to non-Hindi languages, and actually they started to get much stronger ROAS than they used to having just the content in Hindi. And in many cases that small thing is not really appreciated enough, because in many cases if you have strong localization, we can do it actually quite fast. If we go further and we ask ourselves, okay, what are the top languages in terms of internet in 2020 in 2021? So you see that actually just 38% is actually Hindi, but there are a lot of more languages like Bengali, Telugu, and they are extremely strong and important for specific, very big communities in that market. Yeah, and then. And then if we even go even by just the culture and how actually all specific society that it works, is actually there is a lot of those languages that are very present in the media. They are very present in very traditional actually media like newspapers, which means that actually for many users it's actually quite important point, and it's really good to remember about that. Vinay, do you want to?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, there's a slight lag in the slides that I'm seeing, so which is why. Yeah, I was essentially this is about like how much of a share YouTube has in social media, and as you can see in the chart over here, it's significantly higher. So India is the largest market for YouTube globally as well, and you see a significant number of developers, games as well as app utilize YouTube for partnering with influencers to ensure that their content is reaching across to an even wider set of users, and that's something that you can see over here itself. And the share is consistently increasing.
And maybe one point that I think is quite important to add, because what is happening in India is that all countries like I think Middle East, India, and quite a few emerging markets, we used to associate the internet users with very young people, and that was the case. But over time, actually, that share of older people, those like the top groups in those markets, actually growing as well. And actually, we see in this case comparison, for example, for India, 2013, 2019 versus the years 2019, 2025, and you see how, for example, grew these representations of the users, for example, in the age of 35, 54, or even in those older groups. So again, it used to be that indie user was in general like teenager or a very young person, but more and more actually people are getting actually even from older groups to this internet users group, which means that like India is getting more and more interesting for other gaming genres, not just for like let's see male young focused audience. And Vinay, could you share a bit about the payments there as well?
Yeah, I'll cover about UPI payment, and this is really interesting. The UPI is a form of digital payment in India, and this is launched by the government where they have had zero commissions or zero fees for transacting online. So typically, if you would have credit cards being transacted, you'll have certain payment charges that you'll have to pay to the credit card provider. If you had some kind of a wallet payment, you'll again have to have some kind of charges paid to the wallet provider. But here is UPI, which has been introduced in India a few years back, and it's essentially transformed the way Indians make payment. And If I recollect the numbers correctly, in the month of May itself, there were close to around 40 billion odd transactions that were happening via UPI. And amongst UPI transactions, the Google Pay, Phone Pay, as well as Paytm are the top providers for UPI transactions. And like I said, it's super popular because there are no charges that any that the user has to pay or the merchant has to pay to the government for using it. And that's something again that a lot of gaming developers have started benefiting from in terms of users coming online and transacting via non-cash methods.
And of course, there are like a few, quite many examples how like the different companies adjusted their activities to actually, increase the profitability and scale in their countries. Here we have the case from Battleground Grounds Mobile India, which is kind of Indian version of PUBG. I think it's kind of PUBG created for India, and actually it was quite interesting case because they really used a lot of social and influenced like social related content, a lot of content coming from communities. So actually there was not a lot of just users coming just from typical user acquisition, typical buying the buying users, but there was a lot of buzz coming from that point as well. And I think that is actually quite important point, that making sure that we remember about those social part of gaming there as well, especially in those games where actually like multiplayer, where actually that is really feasible and can be done, as in this case. And that would be all from us. Just to like like the 3 points for the end is like again, India has strong potential. That's why we think that it makes sense to create that presentation. Of course, that potential is not the same in all gaming categories and non-gaming apps. So that's why we try to go deeper and show to you that perspective over it. And now India is not only about English and Hindi. It's like more and more actually cultures and more languages are going to the space, which means that creates a lot of space for the markets. I think I remember I talked to once like to one person in Miniclip, and for example, like I think they localize this Karom game as one of the first ones in the country. It was more kind of experimental experimental hobby-based project that no one really had any expectations about. And if you look actually in the top games, it's still there. So that actually, because they built it early, so then it's still one of the top games in the category. So I think it's not possible with typical indie language now, but there are a lot of niches where you can build, for example, one of the first localizations for the specific non-indie language in India. And that would be all from our side. Again, if you would like to ask questions, just go to the Slido. Okay, we don't have any questions yet.